While working on Netaji's mystery, that's when I realized that his political life was as much a mystery or less known to people as was his mysterious disappearance. And that is when I decided to write his biography, Bose, the untold story of an
Okay.
inconvenient nationalist. In his own words, he would say that his coming out was not in the interest of the country. So that
Okay.
meant that he was treated as an enemy and as an Axis collaborator by the Allied powers. Allied powers meant the USA and England and those who were against the Axis powers, Japan, Germany, Italy, with whom Netaji was allied. When Netaji's statue was set up in Kartavya Park, there were a lot of adverse comments and reactions from the Western press, from the Western intellectuals, and even the westernized Brown Sahib intellectuals within our own country.
Welcome to another super episode of the iRonik show. So this is one topic that since the day I started iRonik show, many of my friends, families asked me why don't you do a podcast on Subash Chandra Bose? And personally, I find the topic and the life and death of Netaji very intriguing. I was looking forward to a guest who can give us the right details about Netaji, and finally my search came to an end with Chandrachur Ghose. He is someone who has spent almost 20 years of his life researching on Netaji, writing on Netaji. And finally, we have him on the iRonik show. We are going to speak a lot about Netaji. We're going to explore his life, his death, the Gumnami Baba story. This is one episode that you cannot afford to miss. Watch it till the very end and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your each like, each share helps us through the YouTube algorithm. We are on Spotify. Do follow us. Enjoy. Chandrachur sir, welcome to the Ironic Show. Uh, sir, thank you so much for your time. सर ये जो टॉपिक है ना सुभाष चंद्र बोस का दिस हैज बीन सिंस आई स्टार्टेड माय पॉडकास्ट 6 months back 6-7 months back this has been one of the most requested topic but I was not able to find the right person who would be able to speak on Subhash Chandra Bose. I know you and Anuj sir are the pioneers in India, if I have to talk, who have been researching, who have been the historian when it comes to Netaji's topic. And sir, finally we have you on the show. It's absolutely our honor to have you.
No, no, it's my pleasure. It's very much my pleasure. But let me correct you. I am not a historian. I'm more of an investigative writer. I
Okay.
dig out facts. That's my work. Because I believe that the moment you call yourself a professional historian,
Hmm, hmm.
you bind yourself to certain frameworks, certain preconceived notions, ideas,
Hmm.
and ideologies. I don't want to keep myself restricted or bound by any of those. So
Okay.
I go with facts, and whatever facts throw up, which is in most cases I have found quite divergent from what history per se we have learned, we have been taught,
Hmm.
the history that have been written in academic books. There is much history beyond what has been recorded and taught in academic curriculum. So my work has basically been to go beyond what is usually known and accepted.
So talking about the history books or the textbooks as you mentioned in our academics, so I believe that the history that we are taught is demeaning history to India, because it's not the Indian history that we are being taught about. It's not the Indian heroes or the people we should actually look forward to. Those topics are not being taught. We are taught about how British ruled India or how Mughals ruled India. Why is that so, and how
See,
it can be corrected?
it's a very broad topic. I can't comment on how it can be corrected, but what I have seen over the past 1 decade at least, or maybe I would say from around 2009, 10, from around that time, the discourse on historical narrative,
Hmm.
that the standard narrative began to be challenged very seriously to a number of people. And with the advent of social media, that gained a lot of momentum, that gained a lot of power. And with common people's participation, social media is a very democratic platform. It allows everybody. So just as it brings in a lot of low IQ, imbecile people, it also gives the platform to people who have seriously studied subjects and raise very uncomfortable questions. So it was led by some of those people who were raising uncomfortable questions, critical questions, questioning the traditional conventional narrative, and that brought in a very big change in the consciousness, in the awareness of the common man, the common people. And way we have been taught history in the last decade, at least, as I said, that thing has changed. So we have now different versions. We have a lot of different streams of narratives which challenge the mainstream narrative, and those who were the challengers are in turn becoming the mainstream. They have gained wide popularity. People like those narratives and find more credible. I mean, answering your question, why the previous
Hmm.
narrative was in vogue, why it was taught in that way. uh, I won't say that Indian perspective was missing. Of course, Indian perspective was there. It was not that it wasn't there, but it was always presented in a selective manner, which suited the ideological framework of those who were in charge of academic institutions,
Hmm.
those who were running the governments, their perspective. The history was being written with with an end objective, with a political goal of papering over uncomfortable periods of dissent, periods of conflict, and uncomfortable bits of history were being written off. And there was always the glorification of a selected few, and the roles of a lot of people who played a very critical role in the history, in shaping the history of our country. Their roles were minimized, if not completely obliterated, and that was done to highlight and glorify only a particular few. But that has changed drastically now. It's no more the case, and I don't think there is any uh, concerted attempt to rewrite history till now, but it should be rectified. The way historical narrative has been set, that should be rectified, and that's the job of the government. But I don't find the government too responsive. But that also is not very critically important anymore, because there are so many writers now who are writing very important books, and their books are very, very popular. People are reading them, questioning the mainstream. So a change is happening on its own, whether the government wants it or not.
So I believe it's because of people like you and Anu sir who have been, all over social media talking about. Let's talk about Subhash Chandra Bose. Talking about Subhash Chandra Bose, you yourself have written a couple of books on Netaji. One co-authored with Anu sir, and one you just published, which is Bose. Uh, so and then again, today's youth has access to internet wherein they can tune into podcasts like this. There are so many narratives and so many videos that you can find of on Netaji today on the internet, but very few of them actually speaks about the truth, or actually the maybe the information is not available to them now. People like you who have been researching on this topic, so what is the upper hand that you get compared to people like us who have just maybe one medium or couple of mediums to read about Subhash Chandra Bose, or for that matter Indian history?
See, the thing is, when we started working on Netaji, the our focus, Anuj and my focus, and we put together an organization, a pressure group called Mission Netaji in 2005, and started working to find out the truth behind Netaji's disappearance. We were very focused on that, and one thing we realized was that practically all important files related to Netaji's disappearance were still classified. So we were 70 years away from independence, but still
Hmm.
these files on Netaji were kept secret, confidential, under lock and key, and not available to scholars or common people. In the meantime, a narrative has been built around Subhash Chandra Bose by the dominant academic intelligentsia, which was primarily leftist Marxist, and obviously the Congress was there, and it was in their interest to show the to uphold their ideological position. It was in their interest to play down Netaji's role in winning India's independence, to play down all the work that the phenomenal work that he did, that he could achieve, or what all he did, and to highlight or create certain narratives to show that he committed a lot of mistakes which should not have been done. But he was a great patriot that nobody could ignore. So actually, it was a very interesting case that uh, one person who had been systematically sidelined by official narrative, by the education system, by the textbooks, that person we found was immensely popular and alive in popular imagination, in popular memory, despite that neglect, official neglect.
Hmm.
And we were focusing on this mystery aspect. So as I said, that most of the files and documents were classified. And in 2005, when we started this campaign, the last commission of inquiry appointed by the central government, it was appointed under the orders of the Calcutta High Court. uh, it was the findings of that commission were rejected by the government, and the issue was dead. It was pushed under the carpet. Issue was dead, and we realized that if we don't intervene, if we don't do anything right now, this is going to go away forever, because nobody ever again is going to challenge this issue, raise this issue.
Hmm.
The mainstream media had no interest on that matter. The academicians had even less interest. We had uh, important, highly celebrated historians like Shumit Sarkar saying that, I mean, it's a waste of time to even ask those kind of questions about his disappearance or death. So it was a very hostile situation. It's a hostile environment at that time. So what could we do? I mean, we were youngsters at that time. I'm talking of about 18 years ago. And I mean, we didn't have any special privilege, no special access. What could we do? So we decided that we would go for a transparency related campaign.
Hmm.
Transparency related campaign in the sense that people didn't have much interest in Netaji at that time. We were active in Orkut, and Orkut was the main social media
Right.
platform at that time, and it was not very popular like Facebook is now, Twitter is now, and relatively much lesser number of people used to use Orkut. Facebook was just coming in, and people used to consider as crackpots, as people who were wasting time and creating conspiracy theories, propagating conspiracy theories. So we decided we would go or take the route of transparency, because transparency was an issue that interested everybody. It was a political issue, it was a social issue, and everybody at that time, transparency had become a key political issue. So we started use, as luck would have, we were very lucky to have that legislation in 2005, the year we came together, that the Right to Information Act 2005. And I decided that that was the best instrument. So we started this campaign under the Right to Information Act. We started asking for documents, for information, what information was with the government, what was not in the public domain. So all these things we started, and it went on. We relentlessly we carried on with this campaign, and fortunately, we got the full support of the Central Information Commission. The Central Information Commission was not responsive in the beginning, but once they saw our perspective, once they understood our perspective, they agreed with us. And they meant, because we were talking about transparency, they, as an institution which was set up to induce transparency in the whole governance system, they stood strongly by us. And we had the CIC, Central Information Commission, had its second full bench hearing on the matter of Netaji's disappearance, and that was a big thing at the time. So all these things happening started grabbing the attention of the media. Now, without media's attention, no campaign can succeed in our
Hmm.
country. So, I mean, as it happened, we succeeded to a great extent. The government was asked to declassify a significant number of documents in 2007. That was the first success we had. And then in 2010, uh, I fought this case for over 4 years, 4.5 years, and the Ministry of Home Affairs was compelled by the CIC to declassify over 10,000 pages of uh, information related to Netaji's disappearance. documents which were considered or shown to the Mukherjee Commission, the last commission of inquiry which I had referred to. So, step by step, we were making progress in through transparency campaign. We were getting hold of documents of files which had never been seen by anybody. And then the and then after our campaign, the West Bengal government declassified 64 files in 2015, and these 10,000 pages which were declassified in 2010, from there we found this story that the government of India was spying on Netaji's family and associates, not only on family but his associates too. And this became such a big national story that it impacted the government. And 2014 we had the general elections.
Hmm.
So in 2015 this became a very very big issue. 2014-15, it became a very big issue. And once Narendra Modi became the prime minister, he took the initiative to declassify. He said his government said that all files related to Netaji. Now, by that time, the Mamata Banerjee government in West Bengal had also declassified 64 files. Although we know that not all files in Bengal have been declassified, but 65 four files which we had asked for, whose existence was denied by the Bengal government at that time, they were declassified. And after that, the India government, the central government, declassified around 304 documents, files. Now we know that all files have not been declassified, neither by the central government nor by the Bengal government. But the most critical files would be with the central government, and those would be the intelligence files,
Okay.
because it's very clear that there was nothing like a plane crash in 1945 in which Netaji would have died. So the big question was therefore what happened if he did not die in the plane crash. And our theory, which we had through our research, through digging through these files and everything and other investigation modes, we had been investigating this issue from the time we formed Mission Netaji. It was completely, we were ascertained, we had completely ascertained that Netaji had come back. He survived the, uh, I won't say survived because he did not get into the plane crash, but he did not die in 1945. But later on, in early 1950s, he came back to India and lived here till 1985. So this story, which was treated as a conspiracy theory, as kind of an insult to Netaji's image, when we presented the facts, when we argued in front of the people of the country and in different places, this has successfully become the mainstream story. Now, this is the mainstream. It was never the mainstream, it was always a fringe conspiracy theory, but now people see the results, people see the facts. And in this thing, we have been helped by judicial intervention also. So, for example, in 2013, the Allahabad High Court passed a very, very important order on in which it directed the Uttar Pradesh government to set up an inquiry to investigate the identity of the so-called Gumnami Baba and to preserve all his belongings in a museum, no less. So, I mean, obviously, the question is there are hundreds of thousands of Babas in our country.
Yeah.
No high court ever directs a government to preserve their belongings, materials recovered in a museum. So all these things were happening, and obviously, I mean, after that, we decided to uh, document our findings and our investigation in a book which Anuj and I jointly wrote, uh,
The
Conundrum,
conundrum.
that came out in 2019. And in 2019 itself, Srijit Mukherjee released his movie Gumnami. So all these things happened one after the other, and the platform was set properly for making uh, this angle the mainstream angle. But
Hmm.
our strength has been, what gives us the authenticity and the credibility is that we have not only studied all the files, the official files, and documents in private collections, and done ground investigations but we were responsible for bringing those files out of the closet, because nobody had. This was the job of the professional historians, but none of them showed interest, none of them took any initiative, neither the professional academic historians nor anybody from the family of Netaji. So it was left to us. We did it. We got the files out, we studied them, we conducted our investigation, and we reached a conclusion. So that established our credibility in public eye.
Okay. Sir, you just mentioned that there were a lot of documents that were declassified, as you termed it, by the West Bengal government. Mamata government was there. Then some by the central government, which you said was a 10,000 page report, right? So when you went through these reports and these files, what uh, what kind of information did you get, which really shocked you? I mean, was there something that you had no idea about and you found out from these files?
Obviously, I mean, the first thing that shocked us from those 10,000 pages that were declassified in 2010 was the snooping story that the government of India was spying on Netaji's family and associates till
Hmm.
1970s. So, why would a government spy, set up surveillance and continue surveillance on his family and
Hmm.
associates, uh, say around 30 years after his so-called death? It makes no sense in the because a huge network of officers were deployed throughout the country in all states, who were keeping an eye on those people related to Netaji, either by blood ties or by political association, and reporting back to the central IB. So there has to be a reason behind this, and which could only mean, as at that time, practically all political parties acknowledged that this could only mean that the government never believed in its own story that Netaji had died in 1945, and they sincerely believed, and they were that Netaji was alive somewhere and were trying to find out more about it. That was the most critical finding. The first, and it's not. I mean, reading through pages, government files, it shows, gives different bits and pieces of information which have to be put together. It's not that it comes out as a neat story as such. So you connect the dots, you join the dots. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. You get one piece of information from one file, you get another piece of information from another file. So you have to go through these hundreds of files. Each file, I mean, it was bulky. I mean, 300, 400, 500 pages. You have to carefully study them line by line, word by word, see when those were written, who by whom, what are they trying to say, what are they hiding, what are they revealing, and put that together with the ground level investigations, the people that we were meeting, interviewing, gathering information from them. So everything had to be put together to get the whole picture.
So there has been quite a spy. I mean, we already. I mean, when we were young, we used to hear about Gumnami Baba story and all that, right? So this was personally really interesting for me, intriguing for me, and also for there is also a personal angle out here. So if you remember when we first discussed, I mentioned that I'm related to Dr. Pavitra Mohan Roy, who was
Yeah,
Netaji's one of
yeah.
the allies in INA. Right.
Hmm.
So when you mentioned that his close allies, his family was continuously under the scanner, so do you also mean that they were also keeping an eye on his allies from INA?
Of course, of course. Of course, there were, and we have found some files which clearly show that his INA associates were being spied upon.
Hmm.
But as I said, that not all files have come out yet. So there
Hmm.
are a lot of files which are still secret, and we don't know the full magnitude of the activity. We don't know everything. So files with the when I say intelligence files, it means files belonging to the IB, files maintained by the IB, files maintained by RAW, files maintained by the military intelligence, files maintained by the state special branches or CIDs. So, both at the state level and the central level, uh, there would be a huge amount of files, a whole lot of files which is still kept secret and whose existence is also denied. Because the thing is that you cannot ask the IB or the intelligence agencies questions under the Right to Information
Hmm.
Act. They are out of the purview of the Act, so they don't fall under the transparency
Right.
legislation. so they are not obliged to answer. But even
Okay.
then, we had asked questions of them. We didn't leave them. We asked questions, and they responded. And as it happened that when they responded, they should have avoided. They should have not responded, because we caught the lie. I mean, when they responded, it was not truth that they were telling us, and we could spot, because there are so many hundreds of files and thousands, hundreds of thousands of pages. It is very difficult to build and sustain a coherent lie, because somewhere, somehow, you will say something which will be contradicted by your own files. And that has happened. So, how do we know? I mean, basically, the question you should ask me is, or you can ask me is, if the very existence of these secret files, intelligence files, are being
Right.
denied, how can I even say, as an outsider, as a
Hmm.
normal citizen, that those
Hmm.
files exist?
Right.
That is because we have studied the files which have been declassified. Because the existence of those files are indicated in these declassified files, but they have not been given out in the public domain. So, which basically means the files exist, but they have not been brought out in the public.
Sir, as per the government reports, it has been mentioned that they were in touch. They knew about Netaji up until 1985. As per the common narrative, which was earlier there, that he died in that
No, no, there is no
plane
such
crash.
government report
That
which says that they were in touch till 1985. The government
okay.
has never identified, acknowledged that, or said that.
So it was Gumnami Baba story, which was known until 1985, almost 1984, 85,
Yeah,
if I'm not wrong.
1985.
Okay. So
He
if
died in
if
1985.
if Netaji was there up until 1984, 85, why didn't he come out in the domain, public knowledge? Why
Well,
didn't he come out?
see, I mean, I would, anybody who also, this question cannot be answered in 10 minutes or even half an hour.
Right.
I mean, in the book, the Conundrum that we wrote, we have answered this question in detail. And out of the, I think, around 900-page book, this answering this question has taken us around 250 pages, because it's a very complex case. It's not a normal, straightforward story,
Hmm.
and various several threads have to be brought together. There were many reasons. There was not one single reason. There were many reasons, and I mean, one and if I just say one or two reasons, they will not always sound plausible. But if you put all the reasons together, then it becomes very clear why he didn't come out. I mean, for example, he would say that, in his own words, he would say that his coming out was not in the interest of the country. So that
Okay.
meant that he was treated as an enemy, and as an Axis collaborator by the Allied powers. Allied powers meant the USA and England, and those who were against the Axis powers, Japan, Germany, Italy, with whom Netaji was allied. And we know the attitude of these countries, UK and US, towards the Axis powers of that time. Even we saw glimpses of that as late as in 2022, when Netaji's statue was set up in Kartavyapan. There were a lot of adverse comments and reactions from the Western press, from the Western intellectuals, and even the westernized brown sahib intellectuals within our own country. So the simple point is that, if after 75, 80 years, that is the kind of reaction, the sharp
Hmm.
reaction that comes in after 80 years, just imagine what would have been the reaction 80 years ago, in 1950, for example. Say,
Right.
let's take 1950. What would have been the reaction? There would have been immense pressure on India to set him up for some kind of war criminal justice, war crime tribunal. Although no file as such directly points him or identifies him as a war criminal, but he was looked as looked upon as a collaborator of the Axis powers. So that itself would have uh, created a huge obstacle in the form of objection from UK and US, which were very important partners of India at the time. India was still a dominion, or just had just become a republic. It is still a member of the British Commonwealth. It was asking for help, aid, food aid, and other kinds of aid from the Americans, that they would have uh, put enormous amount of pressure on India to hand Subhash Bose over to some kind of war criminal justice, or war criminal trials, or at the least to penalize him in some form, prevent
Hmm.
his comeback to the political system. That would have created a lot of problem in India, because Indian people would have objected to that very vehemently. And what Bhagwanji, or the so-called Gumnami Baba, said is that India would have become the focal point of an international conflict. And India being a nascent country at that time, he wanted to avoid that situation where the country would suffer because of him. So that was one of the reasons. There were many other reasons. There were many other reasons where the political system was set up in a manner where he did not see himself fitting into it. He was not interested in. I mean, the post of a prime minister or a president was too small for him at that time. He was just not interested in politics. He had taken to the line of spiritualism very seriously, and that was much more than a common person can imagine or can think of. He had uh, so deeply immersed himself into spiritual practices, sadhana as we know it. He had, I mean, his mental setup had completely changed. His way of looking at things had transformed, and he wanted to serve India by being in the background. So it was not that he had retired and was leading a restful life, but he was working. If you had to believe his narratives, his anecdotes, his stories, he was leading an intensely busy life, but mostly in global geopolitical forums arena, and promoting India's interests, and probably playing his games to protect India from becoming a center of conflict between it was a Cold War era, so between the Soviet bloc and the Allied bloc. He was trying to protect India from becoming a zone of conflict. Because if you look at that time at the other parts of the world, every part of the world at that time was a zone of conflict, a fight between these two blocks to gain supremacy and gain their influence. So he wanted India to stay out of that conflict zone, so that he was working towards that. And there were various other issues, and we have also raised the question of certain psychiatric issues, certain psychiatric problems which he might have been facing. His health was quite broken down. He was not in the best of his health. So a basket of issues, a basket of reasons were there. It was not just one. So all these things put together, he there might have been times when he wanted to come out and play a more active and public role, but then most of the times he chose to stay behind public gaze, public eyes, and do whatever he was doing without people coming to know.
Sir, I have a really burning question in my heart. So, when we talk about India's independence, right? It is only limited to few people, not naming one, who are said to be the heroes of India's independence, because of whom India got independence. And Netaji's role is completely cut off from, if you, even if you read anywhere, you will won't find Netaji's contribution to the India's history. So, what was exactly Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's contribution to Indian independence?
Well, Netaji's contribution to India's independence was, firstly, as long as he was in India as a congressman,
Hmm.
it was to build a parallel and alternative form of uh, movement in relation to the Gandhian movement. So Gandhi had his school of thought, which was non-violent, non-cooperation,
Yeah.
non-violent mass movement, but he would keep that entire thing under his control. So the Congress was not allowed to get into a mass movement without Gandhi's explicit approval. Subhas was okay with non-violent mass movement. He didn't have a problem with that. But his problem was that to restrict the entire national movement to that one mode, that one process, one method of movement. So what he started doing was from 1928 onwards, what I have seen while writing his biography is that he was organizing the youth and the student communities across the country, particularly in Bengal, but across the country, uh, collaborating with the various revolutionary groups across the country to create a mass organization which would be very disciplined, which would be trained. Uh, Military drills and everything had become the normal practice in those organizations which were following him, and the British were really getting worried about it. So he planned to build up a national organization which would remain dormant in the normal times, but when time comes, they would create a mass upheaval and take to armed struggle, armed upheaval if required. So he was not bound by any ideological uh, constraints, as in Gandhi's case,
Hmm.
because as we saw that when the time during the when the Second World War had started, that was the time when the struggle, the conflict between Subhash Bose and Gandhi became the most intense, because Subhash Bose thought that that was the ideal time to hit the British government. The environment has been created for that, and Gandhi and the Congress were sympathetic to the British. They did not want to embarrass the British government. So Gandhi made all the excuses he could not to start a mass movement. Now, Subhas tried in his own way. The British government saw that he was succeeding, and he had become almost the second most popular leader in the country after Gandhi, and he had successfully challenged and built up his position nationally. So they did what they did best. The government did best. They in 1940 July they threw him in jail. Now, Subhas had anticipated it. He had anticipated that once the movement that he was planning for, once that would start gathering momentum, he would be sent to prison. And that's why he had started planning at least a year before that about going out of the country and raising forces outside the country so that uh, the British forces could be attacked from outside. So that's how he had planned. It was not a one night's thought or 1 week's thought. He had been planning that for at least the previous 1 year. So he left the country. He wanted to go to Russia, but that was not possible. So he went to Germany and Italy, raised his government in exile there, raised an army there from the prisoners of war. It was not an easy job. I mean, he just went alone, without any help, without any uh, solid backing of any organization. A single man, he just goes
Yeah.
through immense hardship, immense sacrifice. It's unimaginable. It's a material of a spy thriller almost. I mean, it's like uh, just like James Bond without the fast cars, the guns, and the women. So it's unimaginable. So he goes almost unknown entity, very little known entity, goes to Germany, impresses from the uh, top to bottom of the government in Germany and Italy, convinces them to give him that diplomatic status of a foreign head, set up the government in exile there, Free India Center, and then raise the Indian Legion, which was the army of liberation. And then, when things did not work out according to his plans, his expectations, he wanted to go to Southeast Asia, and he was allowed to. The Hitler made provisions for him to go to Japan, and when he went to Japan, he raised another government in exile. The INA, which had already been formed, uh, was in a state of uh, dissolution. It had almost broken down and everything. So he rejuvenated that existing INA, expanded it, gave the call for total mobilization. So the INA expanded, increased in volume like anything. People started pouring in money, all the resources. So there, I mean, the huge amount of work that one man could uh, uh, marshal all these resources. He could put together all these resources and convince. It was not an easy task to just go to Japan, meet the prime minister. Tojo, the Prime Minister of Japan, was not even ready to meet him when he went to Japan, because Tojo had a very bitter experience with the previous Indian Independence League and INA conflict, the conflict between General Mohan Singh and Rashbihari Bose. But once he met Subhash Bose, within a few minutes, he was convinced enough. He was so impressed, he was so influenced that he committed unconditional help from Japan for India's war of liberation. So that happened. Unfortunately, the INA was not in a position to win the battle. It did not have those equipment, ammunitions, logistical backup, and everything that was required to win the war. But it was almost on the verge of winning the Battle of Imphal when luck intervened. It was bad luck, misfortune. It lost the initiative, had to fall back. The monsoon intervened and messed up everything. So all these factors played against the INA, but it was seen with a huge amount of respect in this entire region. But what it could not achieve in the battlefield, the INA achieved after the Second World War, when the soldiers were brought back to India as prisoners of war, and the British government declared that they would be tried, there would be court-martialed. So that created a repercussion, a reaction amongst the ordinary people of the country, and it was not organized or incited by any political organization. The entire thing happened on its own in the very beginning, and the Congress saw the opportunity and stoked the fire, and that uh, almost rebellion, the country reached a state of rebellion, the entire country. So, and gradually that seeped into the Royal Indian Air Force, where there was a mutiny. Then, of course, the very well known Royal Indian Navy mutiny.
Yeah.
And the British Indian Army, the soldiers in the British Indian Army were found to be getting sympathetic towards the INA, and the whole momentum was built up. A situation, an environment was built up where everybody was acutely then working for independence, transfer of power at the very earliest. And when the British realized that they had lost the control, the influence over the British Indian Army, which was the main instrument of holding the country together, that's when they decided. So the INA trials start in November, December 1945. In February, the Royal Indian Navy mutiny happens. Then mutiny after mutiny, student unrest, firing, rioting, throughout the country it happens. And the day the Royal Indian Navy mutiny starts, that's the day when Clement Attlee, the British Prime Minister, stands in the House of Commons and declares that we have decided to leave India by a definite date, which was 1948 June. So that is the situation. That was the situation which was created by the trial of the INA, which compelled the British to quickly decide that they had to leave. There was no more extension. Otherwise, there was no sign that the Britishers were in any sort of rush to leave. So that is the main contribution.
So there has been talk. I mean, there has been so much about Netaji's, Gumnami Baba story, Bhagwanji story, his death controversies and all that. But there is very little known facts about Netaji's early life. How Netaji became what Netaji was. His ideology was completely opposite to that what Gandhi had, right? So how did one person who grew up in India, came from abroad, studied abroad, uh, a Bengali lad. So how did his mindset change, and how did that patriotism get into him? What was his early life like?
I mean, obviously, he belonged to an aristocratic family and was conscious of things around him. But it was only in his early teens that when he got acquainted with his school principal, Beni Madhav Das. Beni Madhav Das was the person who inculcated the value of patriotism, about nature, about society, those morals, the moral values, ethical values, those were for the first time inculcated into him by Beni Madhav Das. And because of Beni Madhav Das, probably around that time, he was he got introduced to Vivekananda's works, And he was so influenced by Vivekananda and Ramakrishna that he took to social service. That became social service and spiritual liberation. These became his two goals in life at that very early age. And obviously, from here to political awareness was a very short step. And so he grew from steps to step. Then he came to Calcutta, got acquainted with the revolutionary groups there, saw them from very close, how they operated, what they were doing. The Gandhian groups, Gandhi was getting slowly getting popular. So all this was happening, and his consciousness was also transforming. So actually, this is right. I mean, very few people know about his early life and what all he did. So and while working on Netaji's mystery, that's when I realized that his political life was as much a mystery or less known to people as was his mysterious disappearance. And that is when I decided to write his biography, Bose, the untold story of an
Yeah.
inconvenient nationalist. So and I realized that there is so much information which have become declassified over the years. And even among these files that we got declassified, that also contained a lot of biographical material. Those contained accounts of people who had worked very closely with him. So this kind of information was not available previously. So I had this access to these contemporary newspapers, journals throughout the world, and I decided to put them together because even his published collected works don't reflect the extent of his activity, his intellectual output. It's very less compared to what we find in the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi published by the government of
Yeah.
India, or the selected works of Jawaharlal Nehru published by the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. So the works of Gandhi and works of Nehru have been compiled with great care, and they are voluminous. But the works of Netaji have been collected by some of his family members, and they create a great drama that they have done a great job and huge service to the country, which is not. Basically, they got government grants, but the output is extremely poor. And as I say, that if you look at the number of years when he was politically active, say from 1921 to 1945, the number of pages for those 24 years, 24, 25 years, if you compare between Gandhi's collected works, Nehru's collected works, and Netaji collected works, Netaji's collected works is one tenth of what has been published for Gandhi, one third of what has been published for Nehru. Now, Netaji was not sitting idle or any less active. He was constantly moving throughout the country. Even when in jail, he was writing letters, reading books, writing notes, and everything. So, there's a huge amount of literature which has
Hmm.
remained outside these published works. And then I realized that there is a lot of information which are lying with private collectors. So there has been no effort by the government. Forget the family. The family is living upon his name, his uh, brand name. So they, there has been no effort to put all this together. So that's why I wrote the biography so that I could include as much information. I could show his varied facets of his personality, the range of his thoughts and actions and activities, which finally contributed to India's independence.
Sir, I have one question about your the other book. You just spoke about your book, which was released recently, the Bose, the Unconventional Nationalist. You also co-authored a book with Anuj Dhar, which was Conundrum. So,
Right.
what is the difference between these two books? If you have to put in perspective for someone who might want to read these two books.
See, the basic difference is I have not dealt with his disappearance in the biography.
Okay.
Usually, biographies contain the political life and the plane crash and all those things. But I decided that I will stop on the last day of his publicly known appearance. So the biography covers only his political thoughts, political views, his religious thoughts, activities, and reconstruction of the personality. Because, as I said, because of lack of material, the full scale personality of Subhash Chandra Bose was not known. So I try to reconstruct that by getting as much information as possible. And I stopped on the last day of his known public movement, known public appearance. Conundrum, on the other hand, deals completely, entirely with the incident of his return to India in the early 1950s till till the last day of his life. So that is, these are two very different aspects, and they're complementary in that context. They're complementary. So you read one book, you understand the man as he was, then you read the other book, and then you try to see the transformation, the similarities during the last 30-35 years of his life.
So these are the platforms where we can speak so freely and so much about Netaji and all other Indian history. Uh, there are very few episodes where I just completely keep silent and just listen to the guest. This was one such episode, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Chandrachur
Thank
sir,
you.
thank you again for your time, and I hope this podcast reaches to as many people as possible, and they get to know the real story behind the man, behind the legend, and they come out and support this Netaji mission that you and Anu sir have started.
That's
And
very
thank you.
important, because a lot of people keep asking that
Right.
why did it happen? Why didn't he come out? I mean, I have reached a stage where I have started becoming a bit rude and say that you look into the mirror and you will know why he didn't come out. Because I mean, now that we have brought the truth in front of everybody,
Hmm.
and if the common man just wants to satisfy his curiosity and not do his bit to get the truth out, to compel the government. It is our government. It's our
Right.
country, our government. It is our job to force the government to speak out the truth. So if we don't do our bit, then we lose the right to ask the question as to why did he not come out, and why did this happen?
Yeah.
Why did he behave like that? So that's as it is. But we do say, without public support, without public standing behind us,
Yeah.
this is a battle we have been fighting for the last 18 years, and we are also getting on with age and years. But without support, without public support, it's not possible. So that's a very crucial point, that we need people to come forward and support the,
Right.
because it's in a battle. Everybody, this is a battle where everybody cannot be a soldier. Everybody cannot fight. Because we are at the forefront, what the minimum that you can do, the minimum that people can do, is to support us so that we can take the battle to the logical end.
Thank you so much, Chandrachur
Thank
sir.
you.
It was such an intriguing and important story to be brought out. And thank you so much and thank you for the work that you have been doing. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you. Good night. Jai Hind.